David.
Thank you.
All right, man. It is good to see you guys. This is very strange. How are you feeling? Yeah? Feeling vaxxed, boosted, tested? You're all good? John? Have a seat. Sit down, Mr. Heilemann.
I can see all your faces. It's really fucking weird. Weird. Don't breathe on me, even from
So
this.
I have to say, I just realized while we were sitting there listening to David, clear his throat, that I was a board member of the IAB for, gosh, almost 8 years, I think.
Did you get hazard? Did you get hazard pay for that?
Yeah, I did. And the IAB has really grown since then, and it was a big deal then, and it's a much bigger deal now. And thank you guys for coming out and being part of this. How many of you know what the recount is? Quick show of hands. All right, thank you. That's about 35%. So
35% of planet Earth is a large number.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So the recount started a couple of years ago. We started with politics, which is the native environment of my partner here, John Heilemann. John and I have been friends for 30 years. I moved to New York three and a half years ago, and John said, I've got this idea for a company. Let's reinvent television news completely. And so we're about 2 years into that mission, and we've expanded what we're doing to cover technology, politics, and culture, because at the end of the day, across it all, business, tech, culture, it's kind of all power, and it's all politics. So we pay attention to the dynamics of the power, and we do it in a very unique video vocabulary. So check us out if you haven't. We're kind of everywhere. Let's get started, John. We have a lot to chop up.
And not that much time.
And not that much time.
But it's easier without a mask, so I'm feeling good about our prospects.
So let's start with politics, because politics is fun, right? We're over a year now into the Biden presidency. There's been successes, the big $1 trillion COVID and infrastructure bills. There's been some misses. Build Back Better didn't happen.
Not yet.
Not yet. The Freedom to Vote Act, although we have the Electoral Count Act, which sort of feels like something, right? How has it gone? What's your estimation of how the first year of the Biden presidency has gone?
I think not that great from the standpoint, and in some ways, some of the things that have happened are not totally within the administration's control. Although, it's one of the things you learn covering politics for a long time, as I've done, is that presidents get more credit than they deserve when things go well, and they get more blame than they deserve when things go badly. So, I think in retrospect that some of the things the administration did on the central challenge that they faced, if there was anything, two reasons that Joe Biden got elected. One, Trump fatigue, and a large enough number of people in the country who wanted to be past that, and seeming to have a competent and determined and an aggressive approach to trying to tame this pandemic. Trump's not here, but he's not gone, and that's not their fault, but he's still a big figure in American life and the most powerful person in the Republican Party by a long way. And COVID has been, up and down, as we all know, as we're all joking about here. I think maybe if you wanted to go back in time, that a number of things the administration would have done differently. Probably not said for a year, we will defeat this pandemic, it will end, it will end, it will end. Where now it's kind of clear that and even among pro-Biden scientists, the notion that the pandemic is going to move from pandemic to endemic, right? Where we're going to live with it, not defeat it.
Right.
And so some of that martial kind of wartime rhetoric was really stirring to people at the time. Yes, we have to defeat the pandemic, but now it doesn't seem quite as plausible. And there's been obviously miscues on things that people note. They don't like the way the CDC messages. People think there's confusing guidance on vaccines and mandates. I think, again, if you had to go back, you'd probably say it's really unclear. It's a huge communications challenge. Do you say to people when you want them all to get vaccinated, would you say, okay, the vaccines, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. There's going to be other variants. It's possible that these vaccines won't stop all the variants, but they will save your life. Or do you just say, get vaccinated, this is the way to stop COVID?
Right.
As a matter of political messaging, you'd choose the latter. That's what they did. But I think a large part of the reason why people are frustrated now, for people who are pro-science, not anti-vax people, not people who are nuts, they're like, well, there's been a lot of promises made, and now there's this variant that I can still get even if I'm vaccinated and I'm boosted, the fatigue level is very high. Now, the upside of that is if this thing really does move to kind of endemic over the course of the next few months, and we don't see some other crazy variant, the administration could be in pretty good shape by the second half of its second year, and people might see this thing in a different light. I think those are the biggest things. But if you look at Biden's performance over the course of the year, you had a really strong January to August, and then the combination of the Delta variant, and funnily enough, because we're going to talk about this in a second, a thing that people don't think has that much political consequence in America. People often say foreign policy doesn't really matter, no one cares in America. But the truth is that if you look at his opinion polling, the Afghanistan withdrawal and what a lot of people perceive to be a botched effort there, and the scenes of the airport in Kabul was an inflection point, and it's been kind of downhill for him ever since. He hasn't gotten a lot of stuff done that he wanted to get done. A lot of I think another thing that probably you would say if you were going back in time is the kind of springtime, I am going to be a transformative president, I'm going to be the next FDR, with a very, very narrow majority in the House and no majority at all in the Senate, except for a tie-breaking vote by the vice president. Those are not FDR margins.
Right.
It's hard to do big, giant things when the country's as polarized as it is and you don't have that many votes to spare in both houses, and that's part of the reason why Build Back Better hasn't happened.
Yep.
I will talk about the economy a little more in the day, but right. I think, right now it's kind of a low ebb for the president, but he's got a couple things coming. He's got a couple things, both good and bad, that are on the horizon.
One of the things he's got coming is this promise he made on the campaign trail around the Supreme Court. So he has an opportunity, and it's always a big political opportunity when you get to appoint a Supreme Court justice. Can we see that clip that we put together?
I'm looking forward to making sure there's a black woman on the Supreme Court to make sure we, in fact, get every representation. Not a joke. Not a joke. I pushed very hard for that. I will select a nominee worthy of Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence and decency. I've made no decision except one. The person I will nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. And that person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court.
So he kept his promise. He's keeping his promise.
Yeah.
This lit up the Ted Cruzes of the world.
Yeah. He's very easy to light up. He's mostly made of petroleum-based fluids. So if you light a cigarette under Ted Cruz, he might just spontaneously combust.
One can hope. Well, give us the sort of the lay of the land. How is this going to play out? Is this going to be a win for him?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I think there are a couple things to say. One, presidents love Supreme Court picks. There's always a big fight about them. He has enough votes, and all Democrats are going to vote for this candidate. So he's going to win this fight. And for an administration that's not won very much in the last X number of months, it's the opportunity. You can't imagine in a White House how much they really think like things are going really bad. One of the things, the truisms of politics: good gets better and bad gets worse. And the other truism of politics, which sort of fights the first truism, is that things are never as bad as they seem and never as good as they seem. So it's like you get a moment like this when things are trending down. It's like you really just see, here's a chance to win something and turn the page,
right,
and try to get on positive momentum. So you're going to win. You have a problem with your base right now. Black voters who put Joe Biden in office, as he says over and over again, have been disappointed in Biden's performance in the first year. That's true in the numbers. And so to be able to make history, to do something that almost no reasonable person thinks is wrong, like the idea that there's never been a black woman on the Supreme Court is ludicrous. That there are people look at the Supreme Court now and say there are only 3 people who are less qualified than most of the people who he's considering. So no one wants to actually stand up who's sensible and say, wait, there's no qualified Supreme Court justice who's a black woman in America. It's ridiculous. So you end up making your base happy. You get to make history. That promise he made last year helped him win the Democratic nomination. So you get to do all that and turn the page. And the only people you're fighting against are the race baiters of the world like Ted Cruz. Is that good for Ted Cruz's politics? It's great for Ted Cruz's politics. But what Joe Biden's politics, what he cares about is doing something that seems reasonable to middle America, which most middle Americans at this point think, yeah, it's probably time for a black woman in the Supreme Court. And obviously his base is going to be super enthused about it. So it's kind of like a slam dunk victory. It would be, a much different fight if a conservative justice had dropped dead.
Yes.
And you had a chance to really change the balance of the court. You're replacing one liberal with another liberal. But still, from the political standpoint, it's just all upside here for him, and they are very smart about this stuff. Ron Klain, the White House Chief of Staff, knows as much about Supreme Court politics as literally anybody in America. And this is one of these times when I sometimes wonder, I think, they might get this right, they might get it wrong, maybe there's a trap door. This is like one of those things where you don't ever want to say anything's a sure thing, but they're in a pretty good position to get a win here.
Yeah. Well, what's not a sure thing is while he's looking at that win, there are almost 100,000 troops amassed on the border between Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. How do you think that's going to play out for him?
I mean, look, if the Supreme Court is all opportunity, the Ukraine situation is kind of all challenge, right? And Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, was on television yesterday and said we might have war in Ukraine, might have an invasion within days. I believe as we sit here now, I think Vladimir Putin and Emmanuel Macron are meeting. There's furious diplomacy going on in Europe over this. And again, I go back to the Afghanistan thing. People say, well, who cares about this stuff? It doesn't matter in terms of politics, in terms of people's health care. The real lives of real people in America. One of the things that we know about leadership is that people care about the perception of strength. And so, the pressure having, I think when the history is written, Joe Biden will say he did the right thing on Afghanistan. And history may judge him well. In the moment, it was bad for him politically, and they know that it was bad for him. So the pressure on this, especially against someone like Vladimir Putin, who, if there's anyone, unlike in Afghanistan, where it's kind of a nameless, it's a faceless crowd there, Putin is kind of, as much as anything, represents aggression on the world stage, and he's clearly testing the president now. There's a lot of ways this could go wrong and get ugly. It's not going to be a thing where there's going to be a lot of American troops on the ground, but a protracted scenario where the allies end up being split in NATO and things go bad and Putin ends up owning Ukraine is going to be a real talking point for Republicans who say, we've let this old, incompetent, doddering man, and you might not like Donald Trump, but he was a tough guy, and this didn't happen under Donald Trump. That's a real talking point for Republicans, and it will be a political problem for Biden if it happens.
So real quickly then, we move on to some discussions around culture outside of politics, although that's almost impossible these days to talk about culture without politics. I think everyone is wondering, is Joe Biden even really going to run in 2024?
Well, it's a $64 million question. I mean, he's going to be very old at that point. And, I'll tell you right now, the three things that are true. One, Joe Biden thinks he's going to run in 2024. Two, anybody who's close to Joe Biden thinks he's going to run in 2024. Three, most of Washington thinks he's not going to run in 2024. So, I think a lot of it depends. I think the reality is that you make these decisions. In our company, we often talk about there's like today problems and tomorrow problems. Everybody has these things. Like, I solve the problems that are in front of me today, and any problem I don't have to solve today, it's a tomorrow problem. For Joe Biden, his attitude is, I don't have to really make this decision until after the midterms, when we'll see where we are politically, the party that is. And as we sit here right now, there's no upside to say anything other than I'm going to run. I actually, like I said, I really think he does think he's going to run. But a really bad 2022, a really bad midterm performance by Democrats, a party that looks at him and thinks that he's led them into electoral disaster and sees the Republican Party on the march and sees Donald Trump out there in the distance like a big, fat freight train roaring down the tracks with a giant Klieg light on his forehead and a ton of money in the tank. Yeah. The Democratic Party will start to say loudly and publicly things they now say privately, which is, maybe it's time for the gold watch. And that conversation will happen. Look, I mean, if Democrats somehow, we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but if Democrats somehow pull off a miracle and win the midterms again, which is not impossible, not likely, but not impossible, and the Democrats hold the House and the Senate, I'll tell you, Joe Biden's going to be running again, and that'll be a whole different conversation. So we'll wait and see what happens on that front. My favorite political philosopher is Yogi Berra, who said prediction is difficult, especially about the future. And I adhere to that view, especially when it comes to midterm elections.
Yeah. So let's talk about culture. And I don't think you can talk about our culture without talking about the cultural divide and some of the issues that have come up that are dividing the country, whether it's school board fights around critical race theory, or now the aforementioned Supreme Court taking up abortion and delivering a verdict in June that is being anticipated as potentially quite divisive. What do you make of where we are culturally?
I mean, we're old enough to remember like when the culture wars. We said, well, we're in a culture war now, man. It's like there were crazy people who said that that Bill Clinton murdered was a cocaine dealer who murdered people at Mena Airport in Arkansas, and people would go crazy about Hillary Clinton like having any role in policy in the White House, and that was in the 90s. So it was like that was the culture. Those were the culture wars, and now it's like everything's a culture war. I think the country's more divided in every way than it's ever been in my lifetime, to a dangerous degree. It's more divided, in politics. Our politics is more polarized than it's ever been. I mean, empirically, not just sort of like our sense of it. We're right to sense it. I'm travel around the country more than most people do all the time, and people are angrier, people are more aggrieved, people are more shirts and skins, more red and blue than they've ever been. And the fact that politics has become such a large thing, and Trump was part of this, but not all of it, we now, like every conversation, has this cast of you're either on my team or you're not on my team, and I know what team I'm on by look. I'm wearing my red hat and I'm on the shirts team, or blue hat and I'm on the skins team, and that translates now into all of these political and these cultural discussions. Again, I don't want to blame everything on Donald Trump, but the fact that the pandemic became political and became cultural and became a war where, like, whether you wore a mask or not, whether you were for vaccines or not, that became a tribal thing was not at all predictable in any other America, in any of our lifetimes, anybody else's, any of your parents' lifetimes, our grandparents' lifetimes. Never would have happened. It would have been, this is a national emergency and there's science here and we're going to follow it. And instead we got, this giant cultural divide on this question.
Well, we got Aaron Rodgers, we got Djokovic.
Yes, right.
And we got Joe Rogan.
And a lot of that, to your first question, a lot of it is racial and some of it's related to gender. So identity politics, such as they are on these questions, abortion is going to be central in midterms. The Supreme Court's taken up these affirmative action cases on the affirmative action policies at Harvard and University of North Carolina. So those are going to be big in the news, and there's a lot of interest on the right in particular in trying to exploit those divisions because they are increasingly a white grievance party. You mentioned, these athletes. One of the things at the Recount that we think about, we can now cover sports. It's like we don't cover sports in the sense that we don't cover on-field sports. We cover off-field sports, and off-field sports, it turns out, people are. First of all, like I was talking to a female friend of mine the other day who said, that her worst, I heard, idea of hell is like sports talk radio, where where guys are on the radio all day long talking about the Knicks game last night and every decision that the coach made and what happened at the timeout, and they replay the game over and over again. Now, personally speaking, I enjoy that. But women, it turns out, are like really interested in sports, but they're interested in the narrative. They're interested in how it connects to larger things. They're not in the trivia. They're
sports
like,
as a stage.
They love the drama of it, right? And part of what we do is we talk about how sports connects to society, culture, class, race, gender, economics, business, technology even. And these stories right here, think about these two stories. The two people we've talked about more in sports on a large scale in America, in media and everywhere else, over the last couple of months have been Aaron Rodgers and Novak Djokovic, who are the two most prominent anti-vaxxers in America in a lot of ways. People who don't care about politics have strong views about Aaron Rodgers and strong views about Novak Djokovic. People who do not know what the Australian Open is, you couldn't pay them to watch the semifinal of the Australian Open. We're cheering when Novak was not let in,
right,
and when Novak couldn't win. And the notion that he paid a price, that he was not there in that final, and that he got his comeuppance, and that Aaron Rodgers lost, There's people out there cheering who don't give a flying fuck about the NFL or about pro tennis, but that's like a big statement moment for them because that guy, that anti-vax guy, that anti-science guy who tried to play by rules that you and I don't get to play by, that guy, got it in the end. He paid his price. And that's the kind of, it layers this other thing. It's there's the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat in sports, but there's this other thing now. And whether you like it or not, as a fact in our culture and society, it creates an enormous, for this audience, for people who do what we do, it creates this enormous market in a way, right? It's like there's a lot of attention who are not the usual suspects. The sports talk radio market, the ESPN market, the on-field, there's no unmet market need there. Yeah. There's a large unmet market need of people who want to talk about sports but just don't actually care that much about the games. But they care about it because they understand it's important. They understand that it's symbolically important and it says something about where our society is going and where it might break down.
Yeah, good point. Everybody's talking about Joe Rogan. I want to take a quick look at a clip we put together.
My doctor, Dr. Rogan.
Will you have that clip?
The podcast has been accused of spreading dangerous misinformation.
If you're like 21 years old and you say to me, should I get vaccinated? I go, no.
I do not know if they're right. I don't know because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist.
Especially now when people are talking about actual microchips being injected into your arm to see if you have COVID-19.
I'm just a person who sits down and talks to people and has conversations with them.
Ivermectin alone, if properly utilized, is capable of driving this pathogen to extinction.
But I try to correct them.
So if you're in a high-risk area, you take it, and it'll protect you.
So if I pissed you off, I'm sorry.
So that's what we call receipts. One of our jobs as journalists is to call bullshit. And so if you follow us, that's the kind of stuff you're going to see. What do you make of the fact that Rogan is now, by the way, another platform just offered, I know there's Spotify folks here, you just got matched. Rumble just offered $100 million to pull Rogan from Spotify over to Rumble.
I think that's good because, you know, the second beat of this controversy, there's the first beat, right, which was Neil Young and then a bunch of other similarly generationally, kind of on the older side, musicians, Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills, and some other people. Now, increasingly, some other folks, which we'll get to in a second, all said they're going to pull their stuff off Spotify. People said that'll never have any effect. I was really skeptical. And then it started this wave, right? Again, interesting kind of cultural story that these artists pulled, they had more effect than they thought they were going to have. Yeah. Rogan goes out and does that little attempt at an apology. Now, this last weekend, right, we have the Rogan using the N-word dispute, and younger artists are now pulling in. Podcast people on the platform are pulling off. And it's a huge crisis at Spotify. Sorry if there's any Spotify people here, I guess there are. It's a huge crisis. Daniel Ek, the CEO, is trying to deal with it. I think he should go to Rumble. Rumble, you have to use the N-word to be on Rumble, right? Isn't that like, that's like, if you don't use the N-word, they won't let you on the platform. It sounds like a perfect home for Joe Rogan. I will say, this raises to me, and I want to throw this to you because we want to talk about business and technology, which are more
your
and
we don't have much time.
But I just want to open the door to this conversation, right? Which is, you know, whether it's at Google, Facebook, Meta, Twitter, take your pick of all these companies and Spotify. You know, there's this debate that's been going on for as long as you and I have been doing this, and as long as these places have existed, has been, are we platforms or are we publishers, right? And if we're a platform, hey, we can't police content because, you know, we're just a platform. We're like basically like a newsstand. Newsstands don't make judgments about what's in the magazines or what's in the newspapers. They just sell them. And, you know, what Daniel Ek's getting called on now is, you pay the guy $100 million for an exclusive show, you're a publisher. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no world where, and you could say, oh, we license it, we don't pay for it directly. It doesn't make no sense to people. If you're paying somebody $100 million for exclusive rights to their podcast, you are a publisher. And I think there are examples, smaller examples of that at Twitter and at Facebook, but that's a pretty glaring one. And it does, I'm interested to think what your take is about this because that debate has huge political consequences for regulation. Yeah. A lot of people say these guys, we should call them all publishers and regulate them as such. And there's been a long running debate about that. So where do you think this, first of all, where do you think this controversy leaves Twitter? Leaves Spotify. And number two, where do you think this controversy goes going forward for that larger debate about platform versus publisher?
I think Spotify did exactly what almost all technology companies do, which is basically kick that problem can down the road. And they did that for a long time, to pivot to podcasts and the decision not to just be a platform for music, but a place that has exclusive content. They didn't consider the implications of that, not so much from the point of view of the law, because at least in the United States, this is not an issue of Section 230 of the CDA. It's just not. It's an issue of whether or not you take responsibility for the things that you put on your, I don't care if it's a publication or a platform, it's the same thing, right? Do you stand behind it? Do you take, responsibility for the consequences of the decisions and actions you take? That's what you do. Whether you call it publisher or platform is actually obfuscating the issue. Are you a responsible corporate citizen? And I don't think that the technology industry has a great answer for that. And honestly, our friends at the large tech platforms are well aware that there's no way any regulation is going to happen of any consequence in a midterm year. And usually every year for the past 15, there's been no way any of this is going to happen. So they don't have to deal with it. And instead you can throw bodies at it, and literally that's what's happening is poor human beings are being put in front of awful stuff to look at all day long, tens of thousands of them. And I don't think that is a solution. So given that the regulatory bodies that exist in the government are probably not going to handle this, the industry is going to have to. And I know that's something that the IAB is working on, as well as the MMA and the ANA and everyone else who has 2 or 3 letters in their acronym, or 4 or 5. But we're not moving fast enough, and there's much more to do.
So here's a larger question, which relates to, not a larger question, a larger company. And if we were going to talk about tech, we could spend some time talking about crypto. I think maybe we won't talk about that.
Let's punt crypto.
Let's punt on crypto. Let's just talk about.
I could talk about crypto for a few hours.
I know you could. I know you could. You don't want to get Battelle going on crypto. But I do. Another subject about which you could talk about for hours, but we won't spend hours on it right now, is the biggest platform of them all, the company formerly known as Facebook, aka now known as Meta. Back when Mark Zuckerberg came out and renamed the company and signaled the shift towards what they're doing now, he put out a video that received some attention, including by. Can
we take a look at a little bit of that?
I'd like to see our folks. Again, we put this. I mean, we put this on the Recount and on the Recount on Twitter, and we end up with like 6 million views for this. People really interested, not always flatteringly interested, but interested in what Mark Zuckerberg had to say about Meta. So let's play that video.
So let's start by exploring what different kinds of metaverse experiences could feel like, starting with the most important experience of all, connecting with people. Imagine you put on your glasses or headset and you're instantly in your home space. It has parts of your physical home recreated virtually, it has things that are only possible virtually, and it has an incredibly inspiring view of whatever you find most beautiful. Oh, hey, Mark. Hey, what's going on?
Hi, Mark. What's up, Mark?
Whoa, we're floating in space.
All right, so like that's the paranoid android's playhouse right there, right? I mean, like, I gotta say, like they made that video and put it out, and maybe I'm alone. When I saw it, I'm like, I don't want to fucking live in the metaverse. If that's what it's like, keep me, like, just ban me now. But I guess that's like Mark Zuckerberg knows a lot more about the future than I do, and he's a lot richer than I am. So maybe I'm just out to lunch. This happened, right? So there's a number of interlocking issues here.
Yes, there are.
One of which is the metaverse like is the metaverse like is a kind of a bullshit thing that it was about Facebook trying to pivot away from a lot of bad headlines that they had all of last year that to try to give Mark something new to talk about, turning the page like Joe Biden.
Yes.
Number one. Number two, one of the things after all those bad headlines, the stock price, nothing really happened. They kept making money. They kept doing really well. We thought, the regulators are mad, but they're not going to really do anything. And then last week, apocalypse now at Meta.
Yes.
Right? Stock price slammed. The whole tech industry takes a giant dive. So one, metaverse, reality, bullshit. Two, Meta, the company, in some kind of real trouble or just like a bump in the road?
Yeah. So on the metaverse, it's both. It's both bullshit and it's a handle we all need as an industry to pick up something that we otherwise couldn't quite get our arms around, right? We love a metaphor, and we haven't had one for a while. I mean, do you remember it was the year of mobile for about 7 years? And then it came, and we're like, wow. And then it was the tech oligarchs own everything, and that was about 7 years. We're kind of due for a reset, and honestly, I have to credit Facebook for realizing that and trying to grab, ground before everyone else. The response hasn't been awesome from the rest of the industry to Facebook grabbing the metaverse, brand and running with it. On the other hand, the metaverse has already been here since 1978 when you had your first sort of, multi-user dungeon in dial-up text. Like, it's just another place you go that's digitally enhanced. So I think both we need a handle to pick this up with and understand it and talk about whatever the next iteration of the internet is. And I think it was a bunch of marketing bullshit, sorry, Meta, but it was. On the larger question, which I've already forgotten, what was the larger question?
Well, is the metaverse real or bullshit?
Oh, and then
what is the company right now?
So a year ago, every January I write predictions, and a year ago, January 2021, I predicted that by the end of the year, Facebook would announce that its user growth had stagnated and its stock would crash. That's the only thing that would make the stock crash. Wall Street only cares about performance, and that's exactly what happened. The reason the stock tanked had nothing to do with the metaverse. It had everything to do with the fact that user engagement and growth had plateaued, and that's just a Wall Street story.
But is that a leading indicator of a problem for the I mean, like, people often predict, like, there's two schools of thought about this, right? One is basically Facebook is so big now that it's unstoppable. It's so big and touches so many people on planet Earth.
Yes.
And then there's this other, again, these are kind of like, I think, the kind of amateur views.
Yes.
The other is, you know, the tech industry is all about things that seem unstoppable eventually being undone by little things that we can't even see on the horizon now. And so when does that day come, when Facebook's not trendy anymore?
Right here, right now. And the question is, does Facebook become Yahoo, or does Facebook become Microsoft? Because it's all about management and leadership when you have a crisis like this. When you need to grow a company, and by the way, antitrust regulators are circulating, so you can no longer grow by acquiring Instagram or acquiring WhatsApp. You have to manage your way through this, and that's what predicated two leadership changes at Microsoft, which you're very familiar with, having written the book on it, that ended up with Microsoft being one of the largest companies, much larger than Facebook, in the world. And that was a 20-year transition, and Facebook is now facing that part of their story. And whether or not Mark is the person is the question a lot of human beings on Wall Street are asking.
Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. I say that dystopian nightmare that I just saw on that screen right there makes me, it makes me worry about the future of Facebook. If it's all about leadership, if that's where they're going to try to lead us, I'm not so sure. Now, on the other hand, Jeff Bezos wants to put us on those penis rockets and take us up into space. and this morning I read this story. This is the best story I've seen in a while. Elon Musk's, this is a headline, Elon Musk's Neuralink brain chip could give users orgasms on demand. Now, between those three visions of the future,
I think it's entirely possible we need some new leaders in the tech
I'm just
industry.
saying, I'm on team Musk. I'll just say, if that's where we're going. I mean,
well, we have to wrap up.
Oh, nothing, yeah.
We have to wrap up. So, how do you feel about the future, John? After this little walk through dystopia?
As long as Elon Musk's in charge, I'm happy. Look, 2022. I see all these people here without masks on, and some of you still are being careful, and I'm glad you're being that way. And we've had a lot of fits and starts, but if you're asking me how I feel about the immediate future, I think it might finally be here where things are going to kind of slightly get back to normal on the pandemic front, and I just would be psyched for that. And I felt it a little bit in November, right before Omicron hit. So I'm knocking wood all over the place. But if we could just be if we could really get a little bit closer back to normal, and we're really an endemic rather than pandemic, man, New York's going to be fucking great this spring and summer, and let's let it rip.
Let it rip.
I'll ask you the last question here related to that. For looking into the future, 2022, this industry, what's on your mind? Pro, con, up, down? What do people have to deal with? Just tell me something.
I saw it on all the banners around here. I see just fealty to the word innovation. I challenge this industry to actually do it. I'm serious. All we've been doing is buying audiences like blind, lever pullers for the past 10 years. Let's start innovating in how we engage with audiences again. That's what I want to see in our near future.
You think that's going to happen? Or are you just kind of wishing?
Well, I know there are a lot of people working very hard to do that. So I think they need to be supported. I'm doing a little wishing. But let's do it. Let's do the work.
All right.
All right. Thank you guys so much for having us here tonight.